So, you're new to Rise of Kingdoms and you're wondering which commander pairs are the best for KVK 1 and leading up to it. Well, join me to find out. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Shappy Gaming and I am a Rise of Kingdoms content creator. I've been playing Rise of Kingdoms for going over 4 years now, and my goal is to help make you a better Rise of Kingdoms player and to make you more competitive, whether you are free to play or whether you plan on spending on the game. Today, we are going to be talking about commanders in the early game of Rise of Kingdoms and which are the best pairings that you should consider running in the early game. So let's swap over to a brand new account that I just made for the very purpose of helping you guys out. So here we are. We're in our new account, and this may look very familiar to you, probably like your own city hall that you have right now. Well, Rise of Kingdoms can be a super fun game, but the commanders that you invest in are so important. Now, a couple things to remember. You will always get the epic commander of the civilization that you have chosen. So for Egypt, you'll get Imhotep, and then the list goes on. You can see this in the civilization tab. You can see all of the different commanders that you get. Now, you should know all of these are epic commanders, and there are only certain epic commanders that you really want to be using in combat. Now, in KVK 1, your selection of commanders is fairly limited. You can see all of those in this panel on the left here. But as you progress throughout the game, more and more commanders are going to unlock. This means that some of the commanders that you could invest in early on in the game may not actually be viable later on in the game. And so my goal is to make sure that you're investing in the right commanders that you can use in the long run. Because Rise of Kingdoms is a very long game. As I told you, I've been playing for over 5 years. I've done probably over 15 KVKs, and my goal is to make sure that you're building the best account possible for the early game and beyond. So let's talk about some of these pairs that you might want to be running in the early game. Now, in Rise of Kingdoms, there are a bunch of different unit types. There's archers, there's cavalry, there's infantry, and there's siege. Now, some commanders are built to be run with specific types of troops. For example, Minamoto is meant to be run with cavalry. There are other commanders that you can actually run with multiple types of troops in your march, which when you're in the early game is really valuable because you're going to have a bunch of different troops and you're probably not going to have full marches of any of them. Now, another thing to keep in mind, the talent trees that you have for your commanders, you see talents and you have skills. The talent trees only apply for the primary commander that you are running. So if I were to put Imhotep with Markswoman right now, I would have Imhotep as primary, and so only his talents apply. This is really important because this also affects what level you need to get these commanders to. You need to get them to around level 40 to unlock all of their different skills, but you don't need to take them beyond that unless they're going to be your primary commander. Now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about some of these different pairs that you might actually want to be running. So, as I mentioned, you typically do want to be running by a specific unit type, but in the early game, that might not be feasible. So let's take a look at some of those pairs that you can run in the early game before you've gotten full marches of all of your different troop types. So to begin with, we have Ethelfled. Ethelfled is a free commander who is legendary who you can actually get from Expedition. If you go into Expedition, after you've gotten a City Hall level 5, you can actually purchase 3 of her heads a day. And as you progress in Expedition, you'll get daily chests where you can claim Ethelfled heads. Do the Expedition as soon as possible because Ethelfled is a very viable commander and even potentially useful into the late game. Now, Ethelfled is a leadership commander, meaning you can run her with infantry, cavalry, and archers all within the same march. However, I would advise against putting siege into your march as it slows down your march speed significantly and does not help you. Now, if you were going to invest in Ethelfled, I would suggest that you max out the support tree, and I can show you what that looks like on my other account. But the pairs that I would put for Ethelfled are going to be Scipio, Joan, and Sun Tzu. Now, why is that? Well, let's take a look at some of Ethelflaed's skills. As you can see, she deals a lot of damage in an AoE effect. She also does a nice debuff to the targets that she's attacking. She has a bunch of other great field skills. You've got counterattack damage reduction, cavalry march speed reduction, and other march speed reduction. In other words, her goal is to slow down a target and deal a lot of damage to it. Then you have some rally buffs. I would not use her to rally unless you're going to be rallying barbarian forts. And you deal 20% more damage to enemy troops that have been slowed. Now, I would always put Ethelflaed primary if you're going to be running her with a mixed use march. The reason for that is she has the leadership tree, and the nature of her skills means that you're debuffing a target before you want to deal additional damage. This is really important because, as I said, you might want to run Ethelflaed with Sun Tzu. Well, if you've debuffed your target, with Sun Tzu, you can then deal a ton of direct damage factor to that target, and you can also do it in an AoE fashion. So these two have a really nice synergy because you have area of effect damage and you've debuffed the target that you're attacking. With Joan is a support march. So you can debuff and you can buff your other marches that you're attacking with. And last but not least, with Scipio, you get a nice tanky march because Scipio is a very tanky commander. He takes less damage. And then you can also deal more damage with Ethelflaed. Now, another thing to keep in mind, you typically do want to bring your commanders to 5 for their first skill and then go beyond the others. Do not unlock the other skills before you bring your commanders to the first skill to 5. This is really important. You can use skill resets, but it does make things more complicated. Now, the other question I'm sure you're wondering is, how do I max these commanders? Well, some numbers to keep in mind are that you need 440 epic commander heads to max an epic commander, and you need 690 legendary commander heads to max a legendary commander. Now, we've covered our legendary commanders for mixed use. What about some of the other unit types? Well, let's take a look at infantry, shall we? So, Pyrrhus is a phenomenal infantry commander that they recently added to the game with the release of Greece. Pyrrhus deals a lot of damage, and he has normal damage bonus. So, who might we want to pair him with? Now, typically, I would not say that you need to pair him with another legendary infantry commander this early in the game. However, if you wanted to, you could pair him with Martel. But if you only had epic commanders to pair him with, I would actually probably put him with Sun Tzu. And again, the reason for this is that Pyrrhus has a skill that makes it so he deals more damage altogether, and he's going to debuff the enemy. And if he debuffs the enemy, then Sun Tzu's skill damage is going to be absolutely massive. Sun Tzu is probably one of the best infantry epic commanders in the game, followed closely by Bjorn. But I would put Pyrrhus with Sun Tzu before I put Pyrrhus with Bjorn. That's just my opinion. You're welcome to test either. Now, what about archers? If you're running archers, you probably should be prepared to spend a little bit more money in the long run. But what is incredibly important is you heard me mention 690 heads are needed to max a commander. Now, out of the gate, the only really strong legendary commander for archers that are available is Tutmos. But as you start getting into KVK, you will likely have the YSG, Yi Song-gai, wheel come around. And that's really important because he is probably one of the best archer commanders even into the late game. And so you're going to want to be prepared to max him. So be sure that you're saving up 690 legendary heads for YSG around the 85th to 90th day of your kingdom being around. Now, why does this matter? Well, there are certain commanders that are going to be MGE, Mightiest Governor event commanders, and there are certain commanders that are going to be wheel commanders. So let's take a look at what those look like. For MGE, as you can see, you only really get 2 commanders before that key 90th day of the kingdom. You get Julius Caesar and you get Charles Martel. Now, if you are a low spender or a free-to-play, do not compete in this event. You are better off competing in the other events just for the standard gold heads. MGE is purely for whales that are planning to be rallying garrison leads. It is not worth the rewards that you get for this event as a low spender or free-to-play. But as you can see, you only have Julius Caesar and Charles Martel available to you. Once you get into KVK2, you get some more options, but that'll be covered in another video, which I'll link at the end of this one, so be sure to check it out. But what about the wheel, Shappy? Well, here is the Wheel of Fortune. Now, as you can see, you have a bunch of spins before you are in KVK 1. You have universal gold heads, which again, I would recommend you save up for someone like YSG. Or if you don't plan on going for YSG, you can use it on those commanders I mentioned previously if you want to be sure that you can use them earlier in the game. The reason I suggested them is because they will be viable later on. I would skip Richard. At this point in the game, he does not have any long-lived ability. He has a great skill, which allows for a lot of healing, but the problem with that is it ends up filling your hospital, and he's incredibly slow. So I would say skip Richard, even if you're an infantry player. So, as you can see here, YSG becomes available at the 94th day, which means that's during your KVK 1. So, if you're an archer, I would recommend that you try to get Tutmos with YSG if you can. Now, if you can't, there are some other great pairs for Tutmos. One of those is actually Imatep. So Tutmos, as you can see, deals a lot of direct damage factor in a fan shape to 3 enemy troops and reduces the healing factor received by that target. This is really valuable because early game, there will be some people who are maxing Richard. And if they're maxing Richard, then this healing effect debuff is going to be huge. Now, there are a couple other things that make him valuable. While outside of Alliance territory, this troop deals 5% more damage. That goes up to 15%. All damage buff is incredibly powerful in this game, even into the late game. And Tutmos has a museum relic, which you'll learn about in Season of Conquest, which makes him even stronger than he is today. Now, Imatep always needs to be a secondary commander. But another thing you can see here is his active skill makes it so up to 5 nearby enemy troops take up to 20% more damage, which makes this march incredibly powerful because Tutmos is dealing even more damage than he was before. Now, in addition to that, Imatep's expertise makes him even stronger because the enemy will get a debuff where not only do they now take more damage, but they also lose 50 rage per second. But this is only effective if Imatep is a secondary, which means you only need to bring his level up to level 40. Now, for all of the commanders that I've mentioned so far, you do want to bring their level up to level 60 if they're going to be the primary commander. You heard me mention earlier, only the primary commander's talents apply, which is why you need to bring them up to level 60, because that is the maximum level for their talents. But Chappie, what about cavalry? Cavalry is a great unit type that I might want to be specializing in. And cavalry get a very unfair advantage earlier in the game. As you can see, there is this really neat thing called the VIP. And as you want to spend money in the game, you can actually get a commander known as Minamoto. Minamoto is easily one of the best investments in the early game for both KVK 1, probably all the way through KVK 3. After that, he becomes less viable, but if you do plan on spending, I believe it's about $300 to max Minamoto. Now, Minamoto is best paired with Cao Cao. That is a very powerful pair that is useful even into the late game. But if you don't want to run him with Cao Cao, I have seen him run primarily with Baybars. Baybars has a really nice synergy with Minamoto because you can deal a lot of damage. You get the instant proc damage of Minamoto, but you can also put him with Baybars, who also, I believe, has an additional damage factor that can be dealt. And then when you run away, you can do so with Baybars, who has a great march speed bonus. Now, let's say you don't want to spend money on Minamoto. Some great pairs that you can run in the early game are Baybars with Cao Cao. Again, you get a very speedy march that deals a lot of damage. Or you can run Baybars with Belisarius, which again is a very speedy march where you can hit and run and you can avoid getting targeted. Cavalry are really good at march speed, which means you can attack a target and run away if you're losing. This is really helpful, especially if you're a free-to-play or a low spender, because you can pick your battles. You can also run Belisarius with Cao Cao or Cao Cao with Belisarius. In terms of primary, it doesn't matter quite as much, though I would probably put Belisarius as a primary because he does have a debuff. I hope that this has been helpful. If it has, do be sure to hit that subscribe button right over there, bottom right-hand corner. Drop a like on the video. It helps me out a lot, and it helps make sure other people get to see it. Also, feel free to share this with your friends so they can run the best marches too. Thank you all. Chappie out.